we go. It's been a long time since we read. Okay. Nita sat at ease, taking a breather and watching the streets of Manhattan rush by. Kit, behind the steering wheel, was holding the dark book in his lap, feeling it carefully for any change in the directional spell. He was reluctant to touch it. The farther south it went, the more the book burned the eyes that looked at it. The wizard's manual had predicted this effect, that as the two books drew closer to one another, each would assert its own nature more and more forcefully. Nita watched the book warping and skewing the very air around it, blurring its own outlines, and found it easy to believe the manual statement that even a mind of terrible enough purpose and power to wrench this book to its use might in the reading be devoured by what was read. She hoped for Kit's sake that it wouldn't devour someone who just touched it. "We're close," Kit said at last in a quiet, strained voice. "You okay?" "I've got a headache, but that's all. Where are we?" "Oh, that was just Pearl Street, close by City Hall." She tapped the inside of her door, a friendly gesture. "Your baby moves." "Yeah," Kit said affectionately. The Lotus rumbled under its hood and sped on. "Fred, you feeling better?" Fred looked up at her from her collar. "Somewhat. I'd feel better still if I knew what we were going to be facing next time. If I'm to make bricks again, I'm going to need some notice." "Your naster, huh?" Kit said. "I'm not sure I have a naster anymore after that last emission, and I'm afraid to find out." "Kit, scrunch down," Nita said suddenly, doing the same herself. The Lotus roared past the corner of Broadway and Chambers, pointedly ignoring a pair of sullen-looking cabs that stared and snarled as it passed. They were parked on either side of an iron-railed stairway leading down to a subway station. About a block farther along Broadway, two more cabs were parked at another subway entrance. From his slumped-down position, Kit glanced over at Nita. "Those are the first we've seen." "The usual access," as Nita said. "They've got it down in the subway somewhere." "Oh, no," Kit muttered, and "wonderful," Fred said. Nita swallowed, not too happy about the idea herself. Subway stations, unless they were well lighted and filled with people, gave her the creeps. Worse, even in her New York, subways had their own special ecologies. Not just the mice and rats and cats that everybody knew about, but other, less normal creatures, on which the wizard's manual had a 20-page chapter. "They're all over the place," she said aloud, dealing with the worst problem first. "How are we going to—" "Oof!" Kit said, as the dark book, sitting on his lap, sank down hard, as if pushed. The Lotus kept driving on down Broadway, past City Hall, and Kit struggled upward to look out the back window, noting the spot. That was where the other book was, straight down from that place we just passed. The Lotus turned right onto a side street and slowed as if looking for something. Finally, it pulled over to the left-hand curb and stopped. "What?" Kit started to say, but the racer flicked open first Kit's door, then Nita's, as if it wanted them to get out. They did, cautiously. The Lotus very quietly closed its doors. Then it rolled forward a little way, bumping up onto the sidewalk in front of a dingy-looking warehouse. It reached down, bared its fangs, and with great delicacy sank them into a 6-foot-long grill in the sidewalk. The Lotus heaved, and with a soft scraping groan, the grillwork came up to reveal an electric-smelling darkness and stairs leading down into it. "It's one of the emergency exits from the subway for when the trains break down," Kit whispered, jamming the dark book back into his backpack and dropping to his knees to rub the Lotus enthusiastically behind one headlight. "It's perfect. Just pick 'em up." The Lotus's engine purred as it stared at Kit with fierce affection. It backed a little and parked itself, its motions indicating it would wait for them. Kit got up, pulling out his antenna, and Nita got out her wand. "Well," she said under her breath, "let's get it over with." The steps were cracked concrete, growing damp and discolored as she walked downward. Nita held out... What?
Can I give it to Callie?
Yeah. Nita held out the wand, if she'll eat it. Nita held out the wand to be sure of her footing and kept one hand on the left wall to be sure of her balance. There was no banister or railing on the right, only darkness and echoing air. "Kit," she said silently, wanting to be sure he was near, but not wanting to be heard by anything that might be listening down there. "Right behind you." "Fred?" His spark came sailing down behind Kit, looking brighter as they passed from gloom to utter dark. "Believe me, I'm not far." "Here's the bottom," Nita said. She turned for one last glance up toward street level and saw a huge, sleek silhouette carefully and quietly replacing the grill above them. She gulped, feeling as if she were being shut into a dungeon, and turned to look deeper into the darkness. The stairs ended in a ledge 3 feet wide and perhaps 4 feet deep, recessed into the concrete wall of the subway. Nita held up the wand for more light. The ledge stretched away straight ahead, with the subway track at the bottom of a wide pit to the right of it. Which way, Kit? Straight, for the time being. The light reflected dully from the tracks beside them as they pressed farther into the dark. Up on the streets, though there had been darkness, there had also been sound. Here there was a silence like black water, a silence none of them dared to break. They slipped into it, holding their breaths. Even the usual dim rumor of a subway tunnel, the sound of trains rumbling far away, the ticking of the rails was missing. The hair stood up all over Nita as she walked and tried not to make a sound. The air was damp, chilly, full of the smells of life, too full, and the wrong kinds of life, at least to Nita's way of thinking. Mold and mildew, water dripping too softly to make a sound, but still filling the air with a smell of bleached lime, a stale, puddly odor, wet trash piled in trickling gutters or at the bases of rusting iron pillars, rotting quietly, and always the sharp ozone and scorched soot smell of the third rail. Shortly, there was light that did not come from Nita's wand. Yes?
Can I have dessert now?
Yeah, go put that back. And we'll pause. Okay. Pale splotches of green-white radiance were splashed irregularly on walls and ceiling. Fire fungus, which the wizard's manual said was the main food source of the subway's smallest denizens. Dun mice and hide-behinds and skinwings. Nita shuddered at the thought and walked faster. Where there were hide-behinds, there would certainly be rats to eat them. And where there were rats, there would also be fireworms and throstles. Nita. She stopped and glanced back at Kit. He was holding his backpack in one arm now, and the antenna in the other, still looking troubled in the wand's silver light. That way, he said, pointing across the tracks at the far wall with its niche-shaped recess. Through the wall? We don't even know how thick it is. Then she stopped and thought a moment. I wonder, you suppose the mason's word would work on concrete? What's in concrete, anyhow? Sand. Quartz, mostly. Some chemicals. But I think they all come out of the ground. Then it'll work. Come on. Nita hunkered down and very carefully let herself drop into the wide pit where the tracks ran. The crunch of rusty track cinders told her Kit was right behind. Fred floated down beside her, going low to light the way. With great care, Nita stepped over the third rail and balanced on the narrow ledge of the wall on the other side. She stowed the wand and laid both hands flat on the concrete to begin implementation of the lesser usage of the word, the one that merely manipulates stone rather than giving it the semblance of life. Nita leaned her head against the stone, too, making sure her memory of the word, the 16 syllables that would loose what was bound. Very fast, so as not to mess it up, she said the word and pushed. Door, she thought, as the concrete melted under her hands, and a door there was. She was holding the sides of it. Go ahead, she said to Kit and Fred. They ducked through under her arm. She took a step forward, let go, and the wall reformed behind them. Now what the... Kit was staring around him in complete confusion. It took Nita a moment to recover from the use of the word, but when her vision cleared, she understood the confusion. They were standing in the middle of another track, which ran right into the wall they had just come through and stopped there. The walls there were practically one huge mass of fire fungus. It hung down in odd green glowing lumps from the ceiling and layered thick in niches and on the poles that held the ceiling up. Only the track and ties and the rusty cinders between them were bare. A dark road leading downward between eerily... Is fire fungus
dangerous?
I don't know, what do you think? Eerily shining walls for perhaps 1/8 of a mile before curving around to the right and out of view. I don't get it, Kit said. This track just starts. Or just stops. It would run right into that one we just came off of. There aren't any subway lines in the city that do that, are there? Nita shook her head, listening. Oh. The silence of the other tunnel did not persist here. Far down along the track, the sickly green light of the fire fungus was troubled by small shadowy rustlings, movements, the scrabbling of claws. What about the books, she said. Kit nodded down toward the end of the track. Down there and a little to the right. They walked together down the long aisle of cold light, looking cautiously into the places where fire fungus growth was sparse enough to allow for shadow. Here and there small sparks of brightness peered out at them, paired sparks, the eyes of dun mice, kindled to unnatural brightness by the fungus they fed on. Everywhere was the smell of dampness, old things rotting or rusting. The burning ozone smell grew so chokingly strong that Nita realized it couldn't be just the third rail producing it, even if the third rail were alive in a tunnel this old. The smell grew stronger as they approached the curve at the tunnel's end. Kit, still carrying the backpack, was gasping. She stopped just before the curve, looked at him. "Are you okay?" He gulped. "It's close. It's really close. I can hardly see. This thing is burning my eyes so bad." "You want to give it to me?" "No, you go ahead. This place seems to be full of live things, your department." "Yeah, right," Nita agreed unhappily, and made sure of her grip on the Rowan wand.
Doesn't seem like it's dangerous.
"Well, here goes. Fred, you ready for another diversion?" "I think I could manage something small, if I had to." "Great. All together now." They walked around the curve, side by side. Then they stopped. It was a subway station, or it had been at one time, for from where they stood at one end of the platform they could see the tons of rubble that had choked and sealed the tunnel at the far end of the platform. The rubble and the high ceiling were overgrown with fire fungus, enough to illuminate the old mosaics on the wall, the age-cracked tiles that said City Hall over and over again down the length of the platform wall. But the platform and tracks weren't visible from where they stood. Heaped up from wall to wall was a collection of garbage and treasure, things that glittered, things that moldered. Nita saw gems, set and unset, like the plunder of 100 jewelry stores, tumbled together with moldy kitchen garbage, costly fabric and boots in bolts or in shreds, half buried by beer cans and broken bottles, paintings in ornate frames, elaborately carved furniture lying broken or protruding crookedly from beneath timbers, and dirt fallen from the old ceiling. Vases, sculpture, crystal, silver services, 1,000 kinds of rich and precious things, lying all together, whole and broken, among shattered, dirty crockery and base metal. And lying atop the hoard, its claws clutched full of cheap costume jewelry, whispering to itself in the speech, was the dragon.
Of course there's a dragon!
Once more Nita tried to swallow and couldn't manage it. This looked nothing like the fireworm her book had mentioned, a foot-long mouse-eating lizard with cigarette lighter breath. But if a fireworm had had a long, long time to grow, she remembered the voice of the young man in the three-piece suit saying with relief, "The eldest has it." There was no telling how many years this creature had been layering here in the darkness, growing huger and huger, devouring the smaller creatures of the underground night and dominating those it did not devour, sending them out to steal for its hoard or to bring it food. Nita began to tremble looking at the fireworm dragon's 30 feet of lean, scaled, tight-muscled body, looking at the size of its dark-stained jaws, and considering what kind of food it must eat. She glanced down at one taloned hind foot and saw something that lay crushed and forgotten beneath it, a subway repairman's reflective orange vest, torn and scorched, a wrench half melted, the bones burned black. The dragon had its head down and was raking over its hoard with huge claws that broke when they touched half the time. Its tail twitched like a cat's as it whispered to itself in a voice like hissing steam. Its scales rustled as it moved, glowing faintly with the same light as the fire fungus, but colder, greener, darker. The dragon's eyes were slitted as if even the pale fungus light was too much for it. It dug in the hoard, nosed into the hole, dug again, nosed about, as if going more by touch than sight. 4006, it whispered, annoyed, hurried, angry. "It was here somewhere. I know it was. 3,000. No, 4,000 and... It kept digging, its claws sending coins and bottle caps rolling. The dragon reached into the hole with its teeth, lifted out a canvas bag. Bright things spilled out, which Nita first thought were more coins, but that turned out to be subway tokens. With a snarl of aggravation, the fireworm dragon flung the bag away, and tokens flew and bounced down the hoard hill, a storm of brassy glitter. One rolled right to Nita's feet. Not taking her eyes off the dragon, she bent to pick it up. It was bigger than the subway token the New York transit system used these days, and the letters stamped on it were in old-time style. She nudged Kit and passed it to him, looking around at the mosaics on the walls. They were old. The City Hall motif, repeated in squares high on the train-side wall of the platform, looked little like the City Hall of today. This station had to be one of those that were walled up and forgotten when the area was being rebuilt long ago. The question was... "The problem is," Kit started to say in his quietest whisper of thought. But it wasn't quiet enough. With an expression of rage and terror, the dragon looked up from its digging, looked straight at them. Its squinted eyes kindled in the light from Nita's wand, throwing back a frightful violet reflection. "Who's there? Who's there?" it screamed in the speech, in a voice like an explosion of steam. Without waiting for an answer, it struck forward with its neck as a snake strikes and spat fire at them. Nita was ready, though. The sound of the scream and the sight of many tiny shadows running for cover had given her enough warning to put up the shield spell for both herself and Kit. The firebolt, dark red, shot with billowing black like the output of a flamethrower, blunted against the shield and spilled sideways and down like water splashing on a window. When the bolt died away, the dragon was creeping and coiling down the horde toward them, but it stopped, confused, when it saw that Kit and Nita and Fred still stood unhurt. It reared back its head for another bolt. "You can't hurt us, eldest," Nita said hurriedly, hoping it wouldn't try. The smell of burnt fire fungus was already enough to turn the stomach. The dragon crouched low against the horde, its tail lashing, staring at them. "You came to steal," it said, its voice quieter than before, but angrier, as it realized it couldn't hurt them. "No one ever comes here but to steal. Or to try," it added, glancing savagely over at another torn and fire-withered orange vest. "What do you want? You can't have it. Mine. All this is mine. No one takes what's mine. He promised. He said he would leave me alone when I came here. Now he breaks the promise. Is that it?" The eldest squinted wrathfully at them. For the second time that day, Nita found herself fascinated by an expression. Rage was in the worm dragon's face, but also a kind of pain, and its voice was desperate in its anger. It turned its back then, crawling back up onto the horde. "I will not let him break the promise. Go back to him and tell him that I will burn it. Burn it all! Sooner than let him have one ring, one jewel. Mine. All this is mine. No horde has been greater than this in all times. He will not diminish it." The eldest wound itself around the top of the horde mound like a crown of spines and scales, digging its claws protectively into the gems and the trash. A small avalanche of objects started from the place where it had been laying the horde open before. Gold bars, some of the small collector's bars, some large ones such as the banks used, clattered or crashed down the side of the mound. Nita remembered how some $10 million worth of Federal Reserve gold had vanished from a bank in New York some years before. Just vanished, untraceable, and she began to suspect where it had gone. "Mine," hissed the eldest. "I have 8,642 cut diamonds. I have 408 emeralds. I have 89 black opals. No, 15 black opals. I have 89! 89! The anxiety in its voice was growing, washing out the anger. Abruptly, the eldest turned away from them and began digging again, still talking, its voice becoming again as it had been when they first came in, hurried, worried. 89 pounds of silver plate. I have 214 pounds of gold. No, platinum. I have 670 pounds of gold. Nita, Kit said very softly in English, hoping the eldest wouldn't understand it. You get the feeling it's losing its memory? She nodded. Lord, how awful. For a creature with the intense possessiveness of a fireworm to be unable to remember what it had in its hoard must be sheer torture. It would never be able to be sure whether everything was there. If something was missing, it might not be able to tell. And to a fireworm, whose pride is in its defense of its hoard from even the cleverest thieves, there was no greater shame than to be stolen from and not noticed and avenge the theft immediately. The eldest must live constantly with the fear of that shame. Even now it had forgotten Kit and Nita and Fred as it dug and muttered frantically, trying to find something, though uncertain of what it was looking for.
Book. It's looking for the book.
You think? Nita was astonished to find she was feeling sorry for a creature that had tried to kill her a few minutes before. Kit, she said, what about the bright book? Is it in there? He glanced down at the dark book, which was straining in his backpack toward the piled-up hoard. Uh-huh. But how are we going to find it? And are you sure that defense shield is going to hold up at close range when it comes after us? You know it's not going to let us just take something. Why not trade it something? Fred asked suddenly. Nita and Kit both looked at him, struck by the idea.
Why can't Fred just summon the book?
Like what? Kit said. Like another book. Oh, no, they said in simultaneous shock. Fred, Kit said, then we can't do that. The you-know-who. He'll just come right here and get it. So where did you get it from, anyway? Doubtless he could have read from it any time he wanted. If you can get the bright book back to the senior wizards in your world, can't they use it to counteract whatever he does? Nita and Kit both thought about it. He might have a point, Nita said after a second. Besides, Kit, if we do leave the dark book here, can you imagine you-know-who getting it back without some trouble? She glanced up at the mound where the eldest was whispering threats of death and destruction against whomever might come to steal. He wouldn't have put the bright book here unless the eldest was an effective guardian. Even through the discomfort of holding the dark book, Kit managed to crack a small smile. Gonna try it? Nita took a step forward. Instantly the dragon paused in its digging to stare at her, its scaly lips wrinkled away from black fangs in a snarl, but its eyes frightened. Eldest, she said in the speech, we don't come to steal. We are here to make a bargain. The eldest stared at Nita a moment more, then narrowed its eyes further. You're a clever thief, it said. Why should I bargain with you? Nita gulped. Wizardry is words, the book had said. Believe and create the truth, but be careful what you believe. Because only your hoard, out of all the other hoards from this world to the next, has what we're interested in, she said carefully. Only you ever had the taste to acquire and preserve this thing. Oh, said the eldest. Its voice was still suspicious, but its eyes looked less threatened. Nita began to feel a glimmer of hope. What might this thing be? A book, Nita said. An old book. Something like this one. Kit took a step forward and held up the dark book for the eldest to see. This close to its bright counterpart, the dark volume was warping the air and light around it so terribly that its outlines writhed like a fistful of snakes. The eldest peered at the dark book with interest. Now there is something I don't have, it said. See how it changes. That would be an interesting addition. What did you say you wanted to trade it for? Another book, eldest. You came by it some time ago, we hear. It's close in value to this one. Maybe a little less, Nita added, making it sound offhand. The dragon's eyes brightened like those of a collector about to get the best of a bargain. Less, you say? Someone gave me a book rather like that one some time ago. I just forget who. Let me see. I turned away from them and began digging again. Nita and Kit stood and watched and tried to be patient while the eldest pawed through the trash and the treasure, making sounds of possessive affection over everything it touched, mumbling counts and estimating values. I wish it would hurry up, Kit whispered. I can't believe that after we've been chased this far, they're not going to be down here pretty quick. We didn't have too much trouble getting in. You didn't open the wall, Nita muttered back. Look, I'm still worried about leaving this here. What do you want? Kit snapped. Do I have to carry it all the way home? He breathed out a hiss of annoyance that sounded unnervingly like the eldest, and then rubbed his forearm across his eyes. This thing burns. I'm sorry. It's okay, Nita said, slightly embarrassed. I just wish there was some way to be sure that you-know-who wouldn't get his hands on it any time soon. Kit looked thoughtful and opened his mouth to say something.
Also, you-know-who.
It was at that moment that Yeah, it's not Voldemort. That the eldest put its face down into the hole it had been digging and came up again with something bright. The Book of Night with Moon fell with a thump onto a pile of golden gems and made them look tawdry, outshone them in a way that seemed to have nothing to do with light. Its cover was the same black leather as that of the dark book, but as one looked at it, the blackness seemed to gain depth. Light seemed hidden in it like a secret in a smiling heart. Even the dim green glow of the fire fungus looked healthier now that the book lay out in it. Where page edges showed, they glittered as if brushed with diamond dust rather than gilding. The eldest bent over the bright book, squinting as if into a great light, but refusing to look away. "Ah," it said, a slow, caressing, proprietary sigh. "This is what you wish to trade your book for?" "Yes, eldest," Nita said, starting to worry. The dragon laid its front paws on either side of the book. "Fair. It's so fair. I had forgotten how sweet it was to look on. No, I will not trade. I will not. Mine. It nosed the bright book lovingly. Nita bit her lip and wondered what in the world to try next. "Eldest," Kit said from beside her, "we have something more to trade." "Oh?" The dragon looked away from the book with difficulty and squinted at Kit. "What might that be?" "Yeah, what?" Nita said silently. "Shh! If you take our book in trade for that one, we'll work such a wizardry about this place that no thief will ever enter. You'll be safe here for as long as you please, or forever." "What are you talking about?" Nita said, amazed. "We don't have the supplies for a major wizardry like that. The only one you could possibly manage would be one of the blank check spells." "I know. Nita, shut up." The eldest was staring at Kit. "No one would ever come in again to steal from me," it said. "That's right." Nita watched the dragon's face as it looked away from Kit, thinking. It was old and tired and terrified of losing what it had amassed, but now a frightened hope was awakening in its eyes. It looked back at Kit after a few seconds. "You will not come back either? No one will trouble me again?" "Guaranteed," Kit said, meaning it. "Then I will trade. Give me your book and work your spell and go. Leave me with what is mine." And it picked up the Book of Night with Moon in its jaws and dropped it off the Horde Hill, not far from Kit's feet. Give me, the eldest said. Warily, Nita dropped the shield spell. Kit took a couple of uneasy steps forward and held out the dark book. The dragon shot its head down, sank teeth in the dark book, and jerked it out of Kit's hand so fast that he stared at them for a moment, counting fingers. Mine, it hissed as it turned away and started digging at another spot on the hoard, preparing to bury the dark book. Kit stooped, picked up the Book of Night with Moon. It was as heavy as the dark book had been, about the size of an encyclopedia volume, and strange to hold. The depth of the blackness of its covers made it seem as if the holding hand should sink right through. Kit flipped it open as Nita and Fred came up behind to look over his shoulder. "But the pages are blank," Fred said, puzzled. "It needs moonlight," Kit said. "Well, this is moonlight." Nita held up the Rowan wand over the open book. Very vaguely they could make out something printed, the symbols of the speech too faint to read. Then again, maybe secondhand moonlight isn't good enough. "Kit, what are you going to do? You have to